Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is a tea called Sleep and Dream. Nice little herbal blend. It has... I knocked it over. I was going to tell you what it was. Uh, Sorry for my reach. It's from Tea Can Organics. It's just nice. Lemon balm, I think. Lemon something. Peppermint and lavender. So, a good little, once again, relaxing tea. Um, I like a good herbal tea. So today I thought I'd do part one of either part one of two or part one of three, part one of, we'll see, of the Q&A answers to the questions that I have received. I put the request over a week ago and I got really a lot of questions. So thank you guys, really thank you. And I shall endeavor to answer them as best I can without going too much into tangents, but we'll see. Oh, and my nose decided to get squeaky. But anyway, sorry about that. You ever get that squeaky nose? First question is from Bonnie Shalangi. My question, who is your favorite younger sister? That is rhetorical. Right, Bonnie? Yes, that's my sister, Bonnie. Yeah. She's also my only younger sister, but, you know, that I know of. Yeah. Number 2, Spread Book Joy asks, congratulations, Catherine, on both counts. Thank you. I would love to know where your interest in history springs from. Did you do a history degree? You may have talked about this elsewhere, so apologies if so. I also know you are an Anglophile, and I have similar curiosity about where that springs from. I have talked about it before because I do talk a lot about stuff, but it's been a long time. But I don't have a degree in history. In fact, I did pretty bad in school in my history classes for reasons that had nothing to do with, I wasn't not interested in history, but it was just the time that I was taking the classes and my own personal things that I was dealing with. But my absolute fervent interest in history came later, like into my early to mid 20s. But I did read history by default because I would read books when I was a teenager about tea. So most tea books start with a little history about tea drinking, whether it's starting off in China and then onward, and then some really bad history, the way people treat each other to get a hold of tea. It's a little bit shameful, but it's still interesting. So that might have been one of the things I did. And but I would say my main interest came from when I started really reading heavier than I had been in a while. And I started reading historical fiction, mainly by, at the time, Jean Plady, who wrote decades ago. And the first book I read was about Queen Victoria, and it was only a matter of time that I was reading not only about her other books about other kings and queens, etc., and other characters, but about but being interested in wanting to know more about these characters, because okay, there's just so much that they say about these people, but what really happened? So I started getting biographies, and then eventually started actually reading history books, and it just went from there. So that was probably where I became much more interested. But it was never something I didn't care about. I just didn't care about it as much. And now I care about it a lot more. But being an Anglophile, I'm not ashamed of being Anglophile. I think it's bad if you exclude everything else from there. I think growing up, I wouldn't have called myself one, but I did like certain Britishy things, like my family and I used to watch British mystery programs together, and a lot of them took place, British mystery programs. A lot of them were London, though, and or little villages, and a lot of them were drinking tea, so I was also getting into tea, just watching these things, and so of course I was curious about going to the land that, Sherlock Holmes, investigated things, and seeing the old Baker Street, even though it was quite different Baker Street to, how it was. Anyway, and also getting into different British rock bands, especially Queen, but then later on some of the 60s groups like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, stuff like that. Reading about them, because whenever I liked something, I'd read about them, and didn't really have internet that much when I was a teenager, so, I guess that was kind of history too, just a little bit more recent history. I think that it just kept directing me to that direction, and that's just what happened. And I mean, I would say partially because of even my background. I mean, my mom's side, originally my great grandparents came from Sicily. My father's side came from mostly from Britain in some way or other, and I think Ireland. There might have been French in there somewhere, but I don't know. So it wasn't like I wasn't interested in my Italian side at all, but I didn't speak it. My family, besides cooking, they didn't really emphasize too much about the Italian culture growing up. And I also kind of felt phony, claiming to be Italian because, like I said, I didn't speak it. It didn't always look Italian to other people, especially when I was younger and I had like this, big, poof of blonde curly hair. Not that Italians can be blonde, but you know what I mean. And a lot of the there were a number of Italian kids in my class that were for real Italian, so I felt phony. And so if people would ask me where I came from, I mean, I came from here, but they always sort of wanted to know more, so I'd kind of focus a little more on my dad's side, or my grandfather came from Scotland. So I guess trying to make a story for myself, I would also find that, I would also look into it a little bit, so I ended up becoming more interested in the Britishy things. And let's not forget that I also, even though I did read novels from other places, definitely, once I got into Jane Austen and then the Victorian novels, it was just, like Helene Hanff, who I'll probably mention again in these questions, the England of English literature, surely that pushed me along a lot too. So I guess that would be it, right? Next question from Faith and Books, great channel. I have wondered what you do for a living. Is that nosy? Congrats on your 1,000 plus 2-year anniversary. Thank you. What classic have you tried to read and are ashamed that you have never finished? Well, I don't think it's necessarily nosy. It's not like, people always ask people what they do for a living and stuff like that. Asking how much you make maybe, or how much you weigh, something like that is quite nosy. But I have a sort of policy. I'm not secretive necessarily, but I just kind of keep, ever since I started blogging years ago, I keep my work life as separate from my blogging or YouTube life or whatever you want to call it, Facebook or anything. Like if I refer to work, I will refer to a bad commute, or, oh, I went to Book Off, which is near my job, or stuff like that. Or, I took vacation from my job, or I took a sick day from my job, but I don't really get into what I do, even though it's not necessarily anything. I like my job, but I'm not, I just keep it separate, just because I think usually getting them mixed up isn't always the best idea. Unless I worked with, I know questions I'm going to do probably in a part 2, ask me a lot about guessing where I work, and what I do has nothing really to do with BookTube anyway, so. Number 4, Bookhans, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, and books. Congratulations for your 2 milestones. Thank you. My question, what are your favorite bookstores, new or used, in New York? There are a lot of them. But I will just mention a few that have mostly used books. The Strand, amazing, legendary. My goodness, that's probably very famous. I don't need to go into it very much. Book Off, which is another one I mention a lot in my hauls because it is not far from where I work, and it has a number of different things, but it has a whole long $1 section that you can get a lot of amazing bargains from. So I love that. Argosy, which is a beautiful place in Manhattan that this lovely old building that is run by 3 sisters, which sounds wonderful. I'm not saying that they don't ever have difficulties, but it just sounds like a dream. Multiple floors. They also sell prints. They sell, kind of antiquarian type books, but they also sell just like used-ish books, $3 books and more. Used to have a $1 section, but no more. It is just gorgeous. It is. See, I'm already going to talk about 84 Charing Cross Road. Uh, but to me, it is the closest thing you can get to in New York, to Marks and Co., that bookshop. It's kind of like not how I picture it, because I've seen the film, but it's not too different, and it is gorgeous. As far as new bookshops, I have to admit I like Barnes and Noble in Union Square. I just do. They have a really great periodical section. It's a really big bookshop. It's OK Cafe. It's not called OK Cafe, but a really decent cafe. I'm not always big on the Barnes Noble cafes as much as I used to be, because the food is kind of but it's not a bad place. And just a larger selection of books than most of the Barnes Noble that I've been to, and yeah, I just like it. And it's not far from the Strand, so you could do everything that if you go around there for a day. There's a couple of Shakespeare and Co., which are also nice, independent-ish bookstore, new books and cafes in New York City, at least. I'm not sure about state. In New York City, they have a kind of a health code thing where you can't have animals where food is, like food businesses are. So, like, we have cat cafes. The cat cafes are almost always, like, the place where you actually buy the food is separate from the room where the cats are, because they don't, they can't mix. So if you have a bookshop with a pet, a dog, cat, whatever you want, I think it was one I went to that had a turtle, you can't have a cafe. Or if you have a cafe, you can't have an animal. So, it's a little tangent, but but Shakespeare Co. has cafes. They're pretty nice. And McNally Jackson is another really great one. What I always hype about them is that they have their literature section divides up by geography, which I love, because sometimes you just want to look for things that way. And they have OK cafes. And Astoria Bookshop, which has a dog. And it's not too far from where I'm at, and they can't have cafes, but there are a couple of cafes in the area near there. So if you get a nice book and you want to, relax with a cup of coffee, whatever you like, if you want to take tea with Catherine, you can go to any of these places. It's wonderful. There are a lot more bookshops that I could probably think of, but those are just a few. I'm probably forgetting one that someone else is going to say, "Whoa, how come you didn't think of that one?" But oh well. Mary Tumulty asks, in pre-pandemic days, have you traveled to Italy? Have you read any of Donnelly's Commissario Brunetti mysteries? They are all set in Venice. Having been raised in New York, in Queens, New York, did you have the opportunity to learn to drive? Well, like I said before, I do feel a bit of a phony claiming to be of Italian heritage, because I have not even been to Italy, and which is a shame. One day I hope to rectify that. I really am interested in going to places, the museums, so much. And just seeing a lot of historical sites and just beautiful, what I could see, beautiful land, beautiful vineyards, I don't know. But Lake Como. One of my sisters did go to Italy, and she thought it was quite nice. So maybe one day, but not yet. And I haven't read those Donna Leone books, but something to look forward to. I do like the idea of Venice. I haven't been, obviously, but I like reading about it. So, oh, I have mosquito bites. Sorry about that. Speaking of water, I got eaten alive yesterday. I sure did. Anyway, you don't need to know that. As far as being raised in Queens, New York, I know what you mean, because you don't, in a lot of parts of Queens, there are parts that are a little more spread out, but in lots of parts of Queens, New York, you don't have to drive to get around, or anywhere in New York City usually. You can take the subway, you can take a bus, you can walk a lot of places. I guess you could take a taxi. I don't take too many taxis, but sometimes, you have to. And yeah, you could spend your whole life just getting around. And so the need to learn to drive is not there. It's not like something that people tell you right away, you need to learn to drive. So you could lose the opportunity because it's just not readily, emphasized. Also, if you have parents who drive, especially if they have a car, you're probably more likely to drive because you could practice with something, even if you get into fights with your parents or whatever happens. My parents did not drive when I was growing up. They did not have a car. I had an aunt who had a car, but a couple aunts who had a car that lived in Queens, but they lived further out, and they weren't, it wouldn't be that easy to just go over and take driving lessons from them. And as a teenager, I didn't get a learner's permit. I got one in my early 20s. I let it expire and did not get a license. I drove once in my entire life in a parking lot with my brother-in-law giving me assistance, but after that, I never did. When a lot of kids would be learning how to drive, like as a teenager, mid-teens, my dad was getting his license, and he only got it because he thought we might be moving out of the city, but we didn't. And it's kind of weird, right? I just never did. My sisters both have licenses, and, one of them still lives in Queens, but as it happens, it just didn't happen. I didn't have as much of an opportunity. But it may happen one day, just not today. One time, I had to go to a family funeral, and my dad borrowed a car, and he drove my sisters and I upstate for this funeral, and it was the weirdest thing because it wasn't something I was used to, being in the car with my dad driving. He did an okay job, of driving, I guess. And by the way, that's Janie in the video. She's making an appearance today. Number 6, misreads a lot. Congrats, I am newer to your channel. Welcome. My question would be, what video on your channel would you recommend for a newer person to watch, and or the favorite video you have ever made? Don't know if I have a favorite, but I made quite a lot. I don't know which one to recommend. The one that seems to be the most popular is one, let's go back to Helene Hanff again, Beyond 84 Charing Cross Road. For some reason, that is one that people find the most. Maybe it's just an algorithm thing, but I guess I would say check that one out, I guess. Melrose asks and says, congrats, Catherine. Thank you. A couple questions. Have you ever gone by Kathy or Kitty? Do you film in a screened porch? I sometimes see exterior siding next to the bookshelves and hear street noise. You must live in a cool old building. What is a favorite novel with a New York setting? Looking forward to find out more about one of my favorite booktubers. By the way, thank you. I like to be someone's favorite booktuber. Yay. As far as my name, oh, JD's making noise. No one called me Kitty. I heard one or two people in my life had called me like Kitty Cat or whatever, or Kit Cat, but not really Kitty. I've never introduced myself that way. When I was growing up, I was Kathy a lot. My dad called me Kathy. I guess my mom did too. My aunts and uncles call me Kathy. My sisters, I think, call me Kath most of the time. But yeah, as a kid, I usually introduced myself as Kathy. And then I started going to school, and there would be multiple kids with the name Kathy, so that we'd all have our initials, except they wouldn't use my initial, my last name is Tom. They wouldn't call me Kathy T, which would have been kind of cool now that I think about it. It was, for some reason, they all call me Kathy Tom. And I didn't like that. At the time I didn't think about it, but it just sounds kind of weird. Kathy Tom. And it was just, I don't know. For some reason, I didn't care for that. So I think, got a little tired of it and did start to introduce myself as Catherine later on. But then I started working with people whose names were Kathy, but their names sometimes were longer names, like not just straight out Catherine, but there was this one woman I worked with who was Polish, and I don't remember exactly how to pronounce her name, but it was a longer, harder to pronounce name. So that she was Kathy, and I became Catherine, and after a while I just didn't really want to be called Kathy anymore, unless you knew me for a long time. I have one friend who's also named Kathy who likes to introduce us together. Hi, I'm Kathy, and this is Kathy, because she gets a kick out of it, so I let her do that. But I always kind of say, if I introduce myself to you, I don't mind being called Kat or Kath or whatever, but I introduce myself as Catherine, so I don't mind being called Catherine. I really don't. I don't film in a screened porch. I don't have a porch. I kind of wish I did. Exterior siding. Yeah, I live in a railroad apartment, and if you can hear the traffic, I'm in the front room, so it's not too far from, where people pass by, or cars go by, and, there's no soundproofing. So, well, I kind of hope people can't hear me very well from the outside, but you never know. Although in this room, it's usually just making these videos. So if they want to listen to me, the audio version of BookTube, that's fine. It is kind of a cool old building. I mean, it's over 100 years old, but there's a lot of needs of different repairs and stuff. It's a little creaky sometimes, but I don't mind it. It does have pretty tall ceilings, which is, I guess, cool. And so what is my favorite novel? I don't have a favorite. I'm so bad at favorites, as you guys would know. You know, I always say that I like saying one of my favorites, so I usually end up having multiple, which I'm going to do now, which I hope you don't mind. So here's just a few books I like that are novels that take place in New York for the most part. So there's a book called New York by Edward Rutherfurd. He does a lot of different books that center around a place. And the first one I read was, of course, London by Edward Rutherfurd. But he did one in New York, and it was good. It mixed a lot of interesting New York history with storytelling. I like the Vanderbeekers of 141st Street by Katrina. What did I write? Von Glaser, I think that's what it says. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. I can't read what I wrote. But anyway, I have the second book, I think, of that series, and I can't wait to read that one. It's cute. It's like kind of a YA-ish. Or is it middle grade or YA? But it's about a family that grows up in like Harlem area of New York, and the adventures of living in an apartment. Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton was pretty great. Those are amazing. Passing by Nella Larsen takes place somewhat in New York, and it is sad in a lot of ways, but it's really interesting. The Tea Rose by Jennifer Donnelly I read years ago. For obvious reasons I liked it. Maybe not obvious reasons. It does start out in London, which doesn't hurt, but then it ends up in New York. So it has, for me, a lot of locations that I like. It talks a lot about tea. You know, it's kind of historical fiction about tea. So, kind of cool, little Jack the Ripper mixed in there, I think. And I also like Lillian Boxfish. That's not what it's called. Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk by Kathleen Rooney. Which I read a couple years ago, which was about a approximately 85-year-old woman. I think it was New Year's Eve, I think. Was it Christmas Eve or New Year's? I think it was New Year's Eve. She goes out from a neighborhood called Murray Hill in Manhattan, and walks all the way downtown and back in the mid-80s. So she, I guess, was born around 1900. So it takes place when there was this mysterious person who had shot a few people in a subway, and, you know, this vigilante, which we all learned who he was eventually. I say that because I remember it when I was growing up. Bernie Getz, I think his name was. Yeah. And, I did not see the movie The Joker, because it just doesn't seem like it would be something I'd want to watch. But I read about it, and they say that they kind of do a little takeoff on that, but probably more violent from what I've seen described. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this book, it was a little bit of a history of her own life and the things she went through and her writing career and all kinds of stuff. But also as she's walking through New York. And New York City, unless you can't walk, which, you know, you're still allowed to love New York, you know. But it is really a great city for people who like to walk. Not perfect. Nothing is perfect, you know. But it is. And so books that have to do with walking around New York just make me happy. Walking anywhere, really, but New York, obviously, as my home, is pretty great. And there's another book that made me think of that. I think it's nonfiction, though. The Odd Woman in the City by Vivian Gornick, I think. I think I have that right. I have it somewhere. I want to reread it. But that's a lot of walking around New York as well. So, just thought I'd throw that in. So that is it for part 1. If you haven't seen your question, if you haven't heard your question answered, it will be forthcoming. I don't intend to skip any questions. I hope I don't. Anyway, so this is Catherine. Here comes the teacup. Taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and question-filled day.